Hello, today we are going to be talking about industrial America, corporations and conflicts between the year 1877 to 1911. This is Chapter 17 out of your America Histories textbook. Now, in the late 1800s, industrialization in Europe and the U.S. revolutionized the world economy. This idea of factories and big businesses and those types of things were really changing and altering not only America, but the world overall as well. You had this management revolution, which all began with trains. It started, as we've learned about trains and their impact, it led to more and more changes that were happening. By 1900, there were factories and urban homes that started to get electricity. This idea of being able to see at night with electricities and not have candles and those types of things was very revolutionary. There's also this thing called horizontal and vertical integration. You'll see a picture of them here in just a minute. But a vertical integration, let me just go ahead and kind of explain it top to bottom, is vertical. Horizontal would be side to side. Vertical, a company controlled all aspects of production from a raw material to the finished good. So for instance, meat. So they would own the slaughterhouses where the animals are killed. They would own the refrigerator cars that transport the meat. They would own the branch houses, which are going to distribute the meat. They would have the delivery wagons, which are going to distribute them to the homes. And they would also have factories for fertilizers and chemicals that would be used to byproducts of those things. So here we can see this image. They have Ace Meat Industries as their example. They have the delivery wagons, the meat packing plants, the cooled warehouses, the refrigerated railroad cars, the slaughterhouses, the cattle. They own every aspect in the entire process to make whatever it is they're making. Horizontal, basically what that is you buy all your competitors. So here we have U.S. Oil Company, who is buying all their competitors, all the other oil companies. So we have vertical, own every step along the process. Horizontal, you own all the like businesses and possess them. Now, some of these things are going to lead to something that we're going to ultimately call a monopoly. You have John D. Rockefeller, who is the king of petroleum, petroleum being oil. He was big into this idea of horizontal integration. Any companies, he would go out and buy them. And if they wouldn't sell, he basically would lower their prices or do things to make those other companies go out of business. And this is ultimately going to be called a monopoly, where you own too much of a certain product within a specific market, and that's going to lead to issues. Many reformers during this time period, late 1800s, early 1900s, felt that monopolies were wrong. More modern times, Microsoft, many years ago, but was labeled a monopoly and had to sell off, and that kind of led to the introduction or the idea of Apple's or Macintosh computers becoming more well-known and stuff like that. You also have this idea of department stores. So modern-day Walmarts is kind of what it is, where they would slash prices. You had a company called Montgomery Ward's or Sears, and maybe you've heard of the company Sears, who created mail-order companies where you would get a catalog and you would look through it and you would put in your order and it would be delivered to you. It's modern day Amazon. Amazon took that idea and has obviously run with it. They also started to increase and change up their advertising techniques to be able to incorporate more people and get more people to know about their products in order to buy them. Now, in the workplace, you have white collars and you have blue collars. Blue collars are ones that are going to be a little more mechanical, a little more physical, a little more hands-on. White collars are going to be ones who probably work in a office, modern day, maybe have a computer in front of them, that type of thing. You have more corporate work, this idea of bigger companies coming about, and they start to kind of break up some of these companies and have managers. So you would have a manager assigned to a very specific department, or you have a manager over all the people that deal with the food in the store. You have a manager over all the people that deal with the dairy and all the people that deal with the boxed items that you might eat. So that's kind of what a manager would be. You also had during this time people who were called drummers. These are people who would ride the rails meaning the trains, and they would ride them basically from city to city looking for a job. Women started to get more involved in the workplace more and more. as we've seen over the last 100 years or so, is their involvement. Women began working in offices as stenographers, typists, low-level office jobs, but they were kind of switching to this white-collar type of employment as opposed to the blue-collar working in a factory. Now, in the factories, many workers were what they called independent contractors. Basically, if you worked in a factory, you had to meet a quota. You had to accomplish X amount of items produced or whatever, and then you would be able to go home and be done for the day. Well, there were some problems with that. This idea that these people only worked until their quota was met is going to ultimately lead to unions and things. But this idea of an assembly line and working in a factory de-skilled humans. It gave humans less skill. And many say, hey, Ford did that because of his assembly line, right? In an assembly line, you don't need to know every step of the process, every step along the way. You only need to know your specific responsibility. This industrialization, there's more factories and things, prompted inequality, not only amongst genders, or you also had races, you had ethnicities. All these things are furthering this idea of some have more, some have less of this inequality. These factories were very dirty. They were disgusting. They were dangerous. Fingers and arms and cuts and health and like breathing in and all these different things are going to play into many of the health hazards and pollution. Now, this idea of de-skilling, having less skill, increased in women and children. By 1900, 1 out of 5 children worked outside the home. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by de-skilling. So let's start with this. A picture of a factory. Here we can see men working in this factory. Here we have the de-skilling. So you can go to the store. You can buy your carrots already chopped up and good to go. Or you buy a carrot and you learn the skill of peeling a carrot. You learn the skill of cutting the carrot. So the one on the left would be de-skilled. You just go and pick up what you want. The one on the right would be skills. Here we can see young girls and young boys working, whether that's in a loom, in a factory making clothing, coal mines, and different things. But it was very dangerous and very deadly and disgusting for them. Now, immigrants were coming from all over the country, from east, from west, and we'll see what that is. By 1900, 75% of people in San Francisco or New York had at least one parent who was born in another country. That's a lot of people. 3 out of 4 people in the 2 major cities of America at that time had at least one parent born in another country. Many Americans did not like these immigrants. It's this idea called nativism. You know, I'm born here, I'm better than you, I should get more rights and more experiences, more opportunities because I was born here. In 1892, they open up Ellis Island, which is in New York City, as a immigration center. And it is going to process the immigrants and allow them to come into America. This idea that America had been going on with for so many years of industrialization, of more factories and those types of things, is going to need unskilled laborers, and many of these immigrants that were coming in were leaving their homes for economic, financial, political, social, food, all these issues, and so they were coming here looking for a job, maybe didn't have a skill and could easily get one. Jews also were coming in large numbers. By the 1800s, you're going to see a lot of Asians, a lot of Europeans. Here's a little political cartoon that talks about immigration between 1780, 1850, 1920, and then kind of a modern day. So I'll just leave that up there for a second and you can read it. So here we have throughout time this idea of all these people coming and ideas that they're going to cause problems when in reality they come and solve many of the problems that we are experiencing. Here we can see Ellis Island. That top left picture is Ellis Island. The bottom right picture, people coming off the boat. And we'll probably talk more about that in class as well. Now, you also have Asian Americans and our true disdain or dislike of them coming over during this time period. So much so that we created a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is exactly what it sounds like. We excluded Chinese from coming into America, and that was passed in 1882. But the Chinese kept coming, and they were very influential in American history, specifically out west, California, San Francisco, Transcontinental Railroad, many of these things. But the Chinese actually ended up being our first illegal immigrants. There you can see the Gate of Liberty, and it's excluding all those people. Here we can see Uncle Sam kicking an Asian person out of the country. And so there was a lot of propaganda and a lot of different things against Asians during this time period. Now, these organizations, these labor unions, are going to be starting during this time period. As workers are working, they recognize that their conditions, there's problems with their conditions, and so they're going to want to get better conditions, and they do that by creating unions. Now, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was all over America. There were steep wage cuts. The conditions of working were not good, and so they said, we need more pay. We need better working conditions. In 1867, the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry. Basically, these were farmers and agriculturemen. Farmers sought to counter the rising power of corporate middlemen through cooperation and mutual aid. So this National Grange came together to help each other out and say, we're farmers, we're going to help each other. These businesses are out to ruin us and not give us what we need, but we are going to stick with one and another. Here you can see an image that represents the National Grange. Okay, you have all these different people that are joining together to help one another and not rely on these businesses that they feel are out there bringing them down. Now, you also have the Knights of Labor. In 1869, it was started as a secret society of garment workers, workers that were creating clothes in Philadelphia. Ordinary people needed control over the enterprises in which they worked, is kind of their philosophy. If I work in a factory, I need some say, I need some control on what is going on in there. It was open membership. They didn't worry about race or gender or employment, except if you were Chinese. Remember this whole Chinese Exclusion Act and different things. And so anyone could be a part of it unless you were Chinese. They would encourage strikes and anarchy. They dealt with the Haymarket Square incident, which is ultimately going to damage the American labor movement. It's going to have the idea of communists and kind of a bad connotation if you understand the Haymarket Square riot a little bit better. Now, you have farmers and workers and something called the Cooperative Alliance. The Farmers Alliance stand as a great conservative body against the growing corruption of wealth and power. So these were farmers that would get together and say these big businesses are causing too many problems, very similar to the National Grange. And then you have the American Federation of Labor. They're still kind of around today. They set up trade unions basically around your skilled occupation. So if you made boots, they would have a union for that. If you worked in a garment factory making clothes, they would have a union for that. They were closed shops. So all jobs were only for union members. So certain jobs, certain things that you were making, you had to be a part of the union in order to be able to get that job. The American Federation of Labor was started by Samuel Gompers. Early 20th century, he was a leading voice for workers. So during this time period, we have a lot going on with our economy, jobs, those types of things between 1877 and 1911.